2017. Can we have a roll call, please? Claire? Yeah.
Board Member Liu?
Here.
Board Member Kim?
Here.
Board Member Balte? Board Member Firth? Board Member Guyer?
Great. And we expect Board Member Balte to be here soon. Now is the time for oral communications. The public may speak to an item that's not on the agenda. I don't have any cards for that. Are there any agenda changes? No. And then we can move on to the first item, which is number 2, the public hearing for a quasi-judicial item, 3001 El Camino Real, recommendation on applicant's request for approval of a site and design review to allow construction of a 4-story mixed-use development with 19,800 square feet of retail, 30 residential units in the CS zone, as well as a 3-story multifamily residential building with 20 units in the RM30 zone. The project also includes a request for a preliminary parcel map for a lot merger to allow for the proposed development, a design enhancement exception, and a parking adjustment for shared parking. The environmental assessment as a draft mitigated negative declaration was circulated for public review from July 3rd, 2017 to August 2nd, 2017. The zone district is service commercial, RM30, and R1. And our project planner is Claire Hodgkins. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, board members. Claire Hodgkins, project planner. The proposed project is located at 3001 El Camino Real. And just a brief overview, 19,800 square feet of commercial retail and 50 residential rental units. Includes 2 separate buildings, one in the CS zone that's mixed use and one in the RM30 zone that's multifamily residential. The site is located on 3 parcels that would be merged into one as part of a preliminary parcel map. It includes split zoning, so it's partially CS, partially RM30, and partially R1. And it also has split land use designations. Currently developed with 9,100 square feet of retail commercial surrounded by surface parking. And this is just a brief overview of the project site with the zoning. Key project changes, I won't go into detail on these because I know the applicant will in their presentation, but the applicant further defined the base, body, and roof of the CS building, lowered the elevation of the RM30 building, added more bike parking at grade, added more indigenous plants and increased the planting on El Camino Real, added details as requested for balconies and awnings, and provided an improved materials board that's located over here. And then key considerations, just the project provides multifamily residential rental housing on a housing inventory site, which fulfills a need for the city. It's also close to office and transit, and this use is consistent with the comprehensive plan vision for this area. There are 2 requested exceptions, one for parking adjustment and one for a design enhancement exception to allow the garage ramp to encroach into the rear setback. Just briefly on the process, so the PTC recommended approval of the project on July 12th. We're going for ARB recommendation. This is a site and design review, so council will make the ultimate decision on the project. So staff recommends that the ARB take the following actions. Consider the mitigated negative declaration and mitigation monitoring and reporting plan, and recommend approval of the site and design application, parking adjustment, and design enhancement exception to City Council based on findings and subject to conditions of approval included in the record of land use action. And that's all for me.
Great, thank you, Claire. And now we have 10 minutes for the applicant's presentation.
Yeah, hold on.
Good morning. Thank you. Okay. Good morning. I'm Rob Steinberg. It's good to be back with you again. So last time we met, there were 6 items in the motion that you asked us to go back and look at, and we could kind of go through those one by one. I think the most important was to try to lower the CM building so that the first finished floor was no more than 6 feet above grade. We were asked to look at the parapet detail on the El Camino building. There was, even though not required, we were asked to see if we could relocate some of the bicycle long-term parking above grade. We were asked to enhance and bring a little bit better material board to you. We were asked to see if we could add a little bit more landscaping on El Camino and widen the planters a little bit. And then lastly, there was a request to see some of the details and to study those a little bit further. So we have done all of that, and I hope you like what you see. So let's start with number 1, which is we have shown the grades around the building. This is Acacia, and you can see that the lowest grade on Acacia is 31.6 feet, and our finished floor is 37.5. We basically have lowered the building another approximately 18 inches to respond to the request. So that's number 1. Number 2, on the expression of the top of the building, there's sort of 2 responses here. One is we've modified the elevations a little bit. When we started studying the details, we realized that we needed a solid panel to separate one balcony from the other balcony. So what first observation is, there is a base to the building. There is a middle, which is sort of capped out here, where there's the solid panel, the railings that go across, and then drop off on the top, which gives a top to the building. And then in addition to that, we've developed a detail where the parapet stops and it steps back, so we get an extra shadow line and an extra, just a horizontal, a little bit of detail, a little bit of expression at the parapet. So there's a 2-step response to item number 2. The third item was, is it possible to put some of the long-term bicycle parking above grade? We've shown you an illustration of the long-term bike, and we have been able to do that. We've been able to locate one on Olive, one near the retail in the vertical access, and we've been able to locate 2 lockers along Acacia. Each of the lockers accommodates 2 bikes. So we have been able to respond to that request as well. We have, next to Jonathan, we have our color board. We are using a fairly simple palette of materials. We are keeping the continuity between the 2 buildings, which we think is important. The only comment that I would make about this is that the metal will be a darker gray than we're showing you. We're showing you a mill finish, and that's only because it's very hard to get a custom color for a little sample. So I think that that actually will be part of this sort of more subtle, refined, quite an elegant palette. So that's number 4, our color material. Number 5, there were 2 things. There was the request to see if we could increase the native planting as compared to the ornamental planting. We have been able to reverse that proportion and increase the native planting by 30%. And the green is the non-native, and the more olive or brown color is the the other, and you can see those proportions. But we basically have changed the proportion about 30% to respond to that request. And then I just wanted to tell you that we also added the width to the planters in front of the building and increased the amount of planting on El Camino. This was actually, sounded like a little thing, but it turned out to be fairly complicated because we had to look at the parking and where the car doors opened and how people got out and where the existing trees were, and then the additional width of the planting, the planters that you've asked us to increase a little bit. And the city likes 8 feet through, so we had to work with the city to kind of get this meandering 8 feet in order to make all of these pieces work. But we have been able to accomplish that as well. And then lastly, you asked about some of the details, to just look at those a little bit more carefully. So there's several sheets here. We can look at first the storefront. You can see that we're alternating between the planters, which are widened to 2 feet, and some introducing the wood-like material and the benches, so that we're not obscuring the view into the retail. We've looked at the balcony railings and how they're being fastened and trying to get a common vocabulary between all of the details. We're trying to balance the water penetration to the deck, so they're being, fastened on the vertical as compared to the horizontal. We're letting the rails sort of float, and it all has one common vocabulary. And then similar sort of strategy on the balcony framing and details for the building farther back on Acacia. The privacy wall, opening it up. If you remember, there was some cross bracing that we've altered a little bit so that everything is in one family. And we've applied that same strategy both to the canopies at the motor court over here, where we've got sort of freestanding columns and overhang to give a sense of arrival, and finally to the stairs as well. So those are the 6 items that you asked for, and we have been through a lot of back and forth together. This is our 3rd time visiting with you. We are pleased what we have to present to you. I feel good about putting my name on it, and I hope you will support us so we can move forward today. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Steinberg. And now I do want to open this up for public comment, but I don't have any speaker cards at the moment. So are there any board member questions? Peter?
Yes, good morning. For the architect, I just want to be clear, the metal mesh, you mentioned, if I understood correctly, that it will be a dark metal finish, not the shiny metal we see in front of us?
Yes, that's correct.
So I just want to be really clear, this metal finish is going to be dark metal, like a mill finish, the mesh itself?
It's going to be a medium gray, and right now it's a little, I can't quite see what you've got, but I believe it's a mill finish currently. It's a little shiny and a little unfinished, and it'll be darkened up a little bit.
Thank you.
Wynn, do you have any questions?
Just a minor one.
Microphone, please.
Looking at, I guess it's sheet 3.2. The sketch labeled 1, there's a tree up there. Is there really a tree up there in the staircase element? At least there's something pink and green with stems.
Please, come on up, and we'll have our landscape architect
Right.
address that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's some planting that's on the 2nd level terrace in the back. So there's a planter up there that has a row of trees.
Okay, thank you. And I would see them on the plan.
Yeah, the plant, I don't know if you have the
I don't
planting
think we have a
plan.
second level.
Oh, actually, the 2nd page rendering, I think of is that in there? I don't think that's in the set.
I don't know that we have a second level
Yeah.
landscape plan.
It's in the submitted
we do.
drawings, but
Okay. I have looked at it if you have it.
If it's the full set that was submitted, it's on 4.2.
L102?
4.2?
Well, we do have the landscape, the second floor landscape on the podium.
Yeah,
landscape, right,
But I don't see any
4
landscaping on this building.
So L
It's on the-
4.02 has the landscape plan for the upper podium, and then on the second sheet of the one that we were just looking at on A3.2, you can see the opposite side, which would be looking at it from the parking lot, essentially, looking at the podium.
Got it. I'm looking at it from Olive, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? No? I have a question for staff. Okay, so I think the staff report asks us to comment on the mitigated negative declaration, or just the mitigation measures for that. And I think, if I understand it correctly, that the PTC did that. And then I don't think that we have the attachment for that. I was looking for it yesterday and I didn't see it. With the mitigation measures, or are they incorporated, or are they completely incorporated into the conditions of approval?
They will be incorporated as conditions of approval, but the mitigation monitoring and reporting plan was, we just provided the links to all of the documents because they were so extensive.
There's so many of them. Okay. And is that, so in our conditions of approval, it mentions Exhibit A, but we haven't, I just wanted to say, like, I haven't read an Exhibit A, and I didn't see it in here. So I just wanted to just clarify that. It seems to me that it's being reviewed elsewhere by.
Sorry, say that one more time.
So if we go to the conditions of approval,
Okay.
right,
What page?
which is page
Yeah.
26. So like number 5,
I'm not finding it.
it mentions the mitigation monitoring and reporting program.
Yeah. Oh,
And it says it's attached here as Exhibit A. And I just want to clarify that I haven't seen it. I don't see it in here.
I
might have missed
apologize.
it.
Yeah.
And, but I just want to clarify that.
Thank you. Yeah, it should have been attached as Exhibit A. We also did include it as a separate attachment with links to it, along with the mitigation along with the mitigated negative declaration. But the final, I think we were preparing this in draft form for council, and we'll be attaching it into the record of land use action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you for that. Okay,
And what does CEQA require that we as an advisory body do with respect to the environmental review?
Consider the environmental document.
Thank you.
any other questions? No? Okay, comments? Peter?
Thank you for the modifications. I think it's a really handsome building. I'd like to focus on just 2 items that I think maybe we could consider a small adjustment. One is the modification to the parapet cap. The architect called it along El Camino, and I don't think that's very successful. I think what we had before was a cleaner design. And I know I was the source of requesting some sort of base, middle, and top. However, I think that particular detail will just cause water to run down the facade a little bit and stain things, and it just looks fussy to me. I'm happy when I look at the corner elevation and the rendering here to consider that the heavier roof form on the corners at least is clearly a top element. And I'd prefer just to not have that detail on the middle pieces. So that's easy enough. The second thing is really sort of a concern with these stair tower features at the corners. I'm looking at the corner rendering on A4.1, which can also be seen on the aerial view on sheet A3.8, drawing number 1. And I have to say, looking at this new rendering, it doesn't look very residential or very welcoming. It looks sort of like a parking garage or a prison, honestly, a staircase inside a metal mesh. I think the colors are fine, and I think that the balconies with the same treatment will be quite successful. But as I understand it, you have 3 different places with this stair tower enclosed in a wire mesh like this. And maybe I'll just say that to my fellow board members. I'd be very interested to see what everybody else thinks about that. I definitely don't want that to slow down the project, but it's just something that catches my eye. Aside from that, I'd like to see what everybody else has to say. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Robert?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a nice building. I guess the biggest concern, having sat up here for a while and in other municipalities also, is that I'm really getting, tired of seeing flat roof buildings. I mean, I understand that that's become sort of the way we have to deal with things, because you can only go up a certain amount of distance, and so you try and get the full capacity and you can't, so you end up with a flat roof, and that's very understandable. But the problem is, after a while, that's all you ever see is a flat roof building. They change slightly, and this one, although well done, is really no different than a lot of other ones, or at least similar to a lot of other ones coming in. So and I'm not blaming the architect for doing that. He has to do it within the set of parameters that he has. I'm just tired of seeing it. After a while, every new building comes in almost the same sort of shape. It's got the, what I call these sort of mirror architecture, where you take various sections, you plop them next to each other, and there you go. You've got another new building. So in itself, I think you've done a nice job. I do agree the mesh makes it look a little prison looking. There's also, not that it really needs to have a strong bottom, middle, and top, but I don't think here the middle and the top are that much different, so I don't think that's really as successful. But I'm really sort of on the fence of this one. Again, nothing based on what you've done. You've followed the instructions that you've had to, and based on the requirements that the city has. But like I said, I'm just tired of seeing these buildings.
Hugh?
Thank you for sticking through the process and coming back to us for this 3rd time. I think I was pretty pleased with the last iteration, and I know that we asked for some minor reconsiderations, and I thank you for clearly laying that out and explaining to us the new changes that have been made. I also agree that the recessed parapet detail is a little too much. I think I was one that said I was fine with the base, middle, and top as it was, and the recessed parapet really, to me, doesn't look right, and I agree with Board Member Balte that perhaps it can just go back to the previous design. I also felt that the auto court area and the stairs for the bar building on the right, and then I guess also for the building on the left, it being that dark gray with a lot of the wire mesh, just doesn't feel quite as welcoming. And I agree that we don't want to hold up the process, but I don't know if there's something that can be done to reconsider either the amount of wire mesh material, or if maybe the color can be changed. But I think we want this to have more of a residential feel, and the way that the stairs look right now, I don't think it looks like too much of a place where you'd want to take the stairs, and I think we want to encourage people to take the stairs wherever possible. So perhaps there can be just a little bit of looking at that, and maybe that can come back to us as a subcommittee item. But overall, I'm very pleased with the changes that you've made, and that little bit of 18 inches that you've dropped the bar building, to me, makes a huge difference. And I know maybe to some it seems only like 1.5 feet, but I think it will make a really big difference in the long run, and especially as the building gets built. I do have kind of one thing that I noticed, which doesn't bother me, but I just did want to put it out there, is that it looks like on the original renderings for the main entrance to the bar building along Acacia, that the portion of the lobby with the glass, the upper railing, I think used to be glass. At least that's what it looked like in the renderings. And I know that it's changed to the wire mesh. I know that it ties in with the wire mesh of the stair tower, but perhaps it can be relooked at, especially if we're maybe looking at the amount of wire mesh, and maybe the glass does enough to make it feel a little bit more refined and less standoffish. But thank you for providing the aerial renderings. I think that's also something that I asked for previously. And also, I noticed some other modifications to like the below grade parking in the main building. And yeah, I think overall, I know it goes to council, but I don't have any hesitation of recommending approval for the project. Thank you.
When?
A question for staff. What's the bicycle parking requirement for a residential unit?
Hold on one second. I think it's, I want to say it's 1 per unit, but let me just verify that. Let's see. Yeah, it's 1 per unit. And then
that's long-term?
And then 1 per every 10 units for guest parking as well.
Okay, so 1.1.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for the well-designed and informative materials. I was really impressed with the information you provided about landscaping, even if I had trouble reading one of the plans. I think this looks like a project that's going to work really well on El Camino. I agree with Robert that we're losing a sense of place along El Camino when I think of this series of projects that we've approved and how many of them have similar rhythms and materials. I wonder how we're going to figure out which block we're on. We probably don't want the extreme sense of place provided by some of our more eccentric motels, but this is going to be interesting. This does, however, look like something that's going to work well on the street. I appreciate how hard it is to design street furniture that works around that 8-foot clearance and the swinging doors and the trees, and I'm grateful that you made the effort because I think it makes a huge difference. It comes up with every single project we look at. And of course, it's nothing to do with us, but it's the council and the applicant, but the use you're proposing seems to be one that's of great benefit to the city as a whole. I don't think the change to the top is particularly useful. I am concerned about the stairwells, or the stair towers. And you come up the stairs and you go outside on the 3rd level and then go back inside, is that right? There's a balcony that then takes you around to the corridor that links the units?
You can go outside. You don't have to go outside. But yeah, at the second level, you can go outside.
So there is a balcony space there?
Yeah.
I don't think it works as it stands. Actually, when I saw your shiny metal, I thought, oh, well, that will make it a little less forbidding. But I understand that's not what you intend. I think those stairwells need more work. I don't know if you can take advantage of the fact that you have that outdoor space adjacent to the one. I'm particularly concerned about the one on the residential building. It does not seem to me to be particularly well integrated into the rest of the building, and it's a surprisingly big element. So if anybody has any thoughts about how to make that work better, by which I mean more attractive and more welcoming and lighter, I would be interested. But with that exception, I think the project is a good one.
Sorry, just to clarify, when you say the one on the RM30 building, are you referencing the staircase or outdoor area, or? Okay. Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
think it's a little confusing because the plans show it as the deck area is being open to the lobby below. Am I reading that correctly? But then
I think that's the first floor because it's kind of a split level.
I see,
You
so
only
I'm
go
reading,
up so much.
misreading. Okay, so it's on the upper level. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, thank you, Wynn. I can support the project. I think it's very handsome, and I think it's it's what you can do on this particular site, given the way the height limit within 150 feet of a residential, single-family residential zone. It makes you step down the height. So I think you are forced into having the large mass on El Camino. I think to Robert's point about the flat roofs, I think we've talked about this before on other projects, or maybe actually on this one, is that there is the height limit, but there's also the El Camino design guidelines actually recommend flat roofs and discourage. Yeah. So, but I think that if in the past at some of our retreats, I've shown images of like beautiful boulevards in other cities, and they do have pitched roofs and false. There are a whole bunch of what we call fake decorative elements, and to me they work. So I think that if we should have a separate discussion if we think that there's something wrong, or if there's that all the buildings are looking too similar, which I think I would probably agree with, then we should go ahead and work on.
I'm fine with it. I wasn't going to pick out just this one particular one.
Right. No, that's what I'm
when
saying.
you drive down, or past any building these days, you can almost, without even looking at it, say, well, it's going to have a flat roof.
Yes.
And it does.
Yep. So I think we should continue the discussion. And we've had it before, but have not really ever sort of recommended making a change to the guidelines. On the plans, thank you for all the changes. I think it looks good. I think you've been very responsive to the board's comments, and I think the project has gotten better. And just have a couple comments that I think the last time the staff had asked us to comment on the DEE, at least for the garage ramp and the screening required for to the adjacent house, and I didn't comment on it last time. So I do want to say that I would support it. There's a substantial sized pittosporum hedge being proposed, and the setbacks. And then there aren't that many windows looking directly down into the house, so that I can support that. And on the findings, I did have some comments for staff. So on page 20, the second last sentence in the paragraph says the project has been designed to highlight natural materials, which is wood, and the colors are subdued in accordance with the El Camino design guidelines. And I think I may just phrase that. I think the El Camino design guidelines discourage having more than 3 bright colors. But I wouldn't say like black or like dark gray and white is subdued. Yeah. So I would just sort of say that it's just not there are no bright colors on there. On the next page, on page 21, under finding 3, which is about the design quality, you do have a sentence in there that says the design is set back substantially to provide space between the proposed buildings and nearby single-family residential uses. And I think that you actually already have that in under finding 2. So I think it's just it's just not needed there. I think it's already covered before there.
Just to
be clear, are you striking, you suggest
I was just saying
that entire
striking it
sentence?
because it's, the setback isn't really about materials, right? The setback is about finding two,
Okay.
right? You're making transitions and,
Okay, we may want to add a little bit more if we're going to be replacing that sentence.
yeah.
Okay.
And then on the next page, on 22, on the very first, at the very top of the page, it says the project would not impact the existing bike path along El Camino. And I don't know what that is. So we don't have bike lanes. Are we just saying existing bicycle uses, or was that maybe referencing like the Park Boulevard, Bicycle Boulevard, or?
Yeah, it's actually two things. I mean, I guess it's saying that it wouldn't impact the ability to use the bike lane, but more importantly, it doesn't impact the potential for a larger bike lane to be built, a Class 2 bike lane along that road. That's something that
In the future.
Caltrans is looking at in the future. I'll
So you're
clarify
saying,
that.
right, so you're sort of saying there are no bulb outs that would sort of protrude into the right of way?
So there are going to be bulb outs, but we're designing them to be only 4 feet, so it would allow that space, yeah.
Okay. Yes, Wynn?
I agree with you that there is no existing bike path.
Yeah.
So,
Well, but there are, I would say there are bicyclists who use it.
Yeah, but that's not a bike path.
Right.
It
So,
seems to me misleading to talk about an existing bike path.
so we'll strike the existing and replace it with a future.
yeah. Great. And then under finding 5, which is about plants, it says the plant species proposed are primarily indigenous, approximately 70% indigenous as shown on sheet L 4.11. And I don't think that's quite, I think that could be read incorrectly. I think it would say that if you look at the plant list, right, and it does outline which ones are native and which ones are not native. If you're just looking by species type, it's in the minority. But if you look at plant quantities, it could be in the majority. So I would just make that distinction under there. And then I think also I had mentioned that previously under the mitigation monitoring, which is condition of approval 5, is that I think the board has not seen Exhibit A. But my understanding is that this went to the planning, this got approved by the Planning and Transportation Commission, and they reviewed all of the environmental documents. So that's all that I have on this one. And I would support if the board wants to modify the parapet cap and the stair towers, I would be willing to go along with that. On exterior stair towers, I think that the thing that I've noticed on the buildings that I've worked on is that it could look good in the daytime, and then at nighttime all of the exit lighting shows, and it can look completely different. And I think that like the interior colors of the stair tower and just any design that happens in there is actually important in how they look. I don't necessarily think that the building has to look residential. I think in this area it's all used to be railroad warehouses, and it has kind of an industrial look. The neighboring Equinox building and the sort of the Fry's Maxi Mart site, all of those are fairly industrial looking, and I think it's okay to tie into some of that.
Now, do you want to bring that back to like?
A subcommittee, I don't think the board
Okay.
needs, I think the board is pretty clear. I think it
No,
seems
I
like there's a
agree.
majority.
Right, okay.
I think there's a majority, I think we sound like everybody's on the same page about that. Okay, any other follow-up comments? No? Somebody want to try to make a motion?
If you'll coach me, I would move that the board recommend approval of this project based upon the findings and with the conditions set forth in the staff report with the following changes. On page 22, the project would not impact a future bike path in line 1. And then down in finding number 3, last paragraph, rather than the plant species proposed are, the planting proposed is primarily indigenous. And what was your first one?
There were 2 other changes to the
Right.
findings. Finding 1 had a change to replace subdued colors with not bright colors. And finding number 3, striking the
Redundant.
3rd sentence in that paragraph.
Exactly. And adding a condition that the design of the, what do you call those, stair towers? And the cornice, with the roof element, roof parapet be referred to subcommittee for further review and approval. Recommendation.
I just want to clarify, this is a recommendation to council and not the
Yes.
planning director and this time.
And included in that is our recommendation of approval of the design enhancement exception and our review of the mitigated negative declaration.
I can second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 5-0. Thank you. Congratulations. We'll see you at the council. Okay, and then we're ready for the next item. We'll take a 2-minute break for them to get set up. Okay, we're ready for the next item. This is a public hearing for quasi-judicial item, 180 Hamilton Avenue, consideration of a minor architectural review to allow for exterior improvements to an existing hotel. The proposed changes include replacing the ground floor storefronts along the Hamilton Avenue and the Emerson Street entries, replacing the existing awning at the Emerson Street entry, new facade finishes on the first floor and part of the second floor. The environmental assessment is exempt from the provisions of CEQA per guideline section 15301, and the zone district is CDC GFP. And our project planner is Samuel Gutierrez. Welcome.
Good morning to the board. Thank you. My name is Samuel Gutierrez. I'm the project planner for this project. It is located here in downtown at 180 Hamilton, just a few blocks from where we sit right now. So I'm going to go into a little history of the building before we go into the project overview. It is one of the more prominent buildings in downtown and has gone before the board for review previously. It is currently a hotel use with an auxiliary restaurant on the ground floor, and per today's code it is legally not conforming for FAR and its height, although there is no proposed changes to that, so it will not increase or decrease any degree of nonconformity. This is purely application for exterior changes to the building. So moving forward, the exterior changes include changes to the ground floor, as mentioned, and the projecting second floor balcony area, and a new awning that goes along the Emerson entrance. It projects over the sidewalk, and the planters along the Hamilton Avenue face are proposed to change. The new colors and finishes are also going to change on the building. This would include the doors, the mullions trims, the railing, and new entry pavers along the Hamilton side of the building that will match the new textured stone facade that more prominently show along the Emerson side of the building on the first floor and wrap around to that entrance on the corner of Hamilton there. So the existing conditions of the building, I have some images shown. You can see that the more prominent change that would be most noticeable would be the change to the ground floor there, where you could see a daytime view of the perforated panel, which during the day it's not as discernible what that perforation truly is, but in the evening view you start to notice, oh, it forms a tree mosaic which actually connects to the large mosaic that's long standing on the side of the building of El Palo Alto, which of course is our namesake in the city. And the building is even more prominent because of the surrounding area. You'll see much smaller buildings directly across the street. We'll see the Creamery building. It's a single-story historic building. On the other corner, directly across from that, we'll see a historic two-story office building. And then directly across from the subject site, we see a newer building. It is mixed-use office and retail and ground floor. And I do want to mention that the adjacent building at 620 Emerson will also mirror some of these proposed changes to the 180 Hamilton site. There is currently an active application to propose a new building there at 620, which will tie the ground floor restaurant in the hotel at 180 Hamilton, expanding it into the 620 Emerson space. Since we do have an application, I did want to mention that because that will come from before the board in the coming months. So the proposed changes are shown here, and I won't go into too much greater detail because I'm sure the applicant will fill you in on the fine details, but you could see the differences here on the ground floor facade, in particular the textured stone finish on the ground floor does change what had previously been reviewed and approved by the Architectural Review Board back in 2012, and that was the kind of cusp of staff's review and saying perhaps this should go before the board again, amongst other things. We saw some conflicts possibly with the comp plan, where we would have some comprehensive plan and goal conflicts potentially. The pedestrian overlay was another thing, because the zoning does state that you need to avoid blank walls, and that's where staff felt potentially this design change could form a new blank wall. And then the ARB findings for the compatibility with the project's design for the site in particular and the surrounding area. So these are some of the key considerations that staff is seeking the board's feedback and comments on. And the recommendation that staff has is to review and provide formal comments for this application or possibly continue to an uncertain date. Thank you. Concludes the presentation.
Great, thank you. So now is the time for the applicant presentation. Yes, Wynn.
I needed to say that when I was looking at the site, on one of several times I went to look at it, somebody on staff graciously took me through the building and also through 620 Emerson to see what those spaces look like and what the current uses were. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other disclosures? No? Great. Okay, welcome.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Greg Studheit. I'm with Montalba Architects, and I'm just here to give you a brief presentation this morning about our little project down the street here. This is at the corner of Hamilton and Emerson. It's currently, or actually until a few days ago, was formerly the Epiphany Hotel, and it's now being transformed into a Nobu Hotel. The intent is to keep the hotel open while we're doing this. So we're going to be working on some of the interiors and a little bit of kind of exterior here, as we'll get into. So you can see here, this is the building as it exists right now. There's currently a 8-story building with rooms facing north and south. And we have kind of a strong belt course that runs around the building and divides the ground floor from the rest of the levels up above. There's a canopy right here that demarcates the pedestrian entrance off of Emerson, and then the interior of that, as you had mentioned before, is the lobby, and then small lounge on the second floor and some office spaces, as well as a couple of rooms. And then the bottom over here is the new Nobu restaurant. You can see here on the next image, the restaurant is actually finished and operating currently. The majority of our efforts are on the ground floor. We're going to be replacing wall finishes, as Samuel mentioned, refinishing the existing belt course, new canopy here at the entry. It's intended to be a bit lighter than the canopy that's there now. And then above, the only real thing that we're doing is replacing the screens that separate the balconies at the upper levels. We're not proposing many changes to the upper portion of the building. The massing stays the same. And of course, the Palo Alto mosaic on the corner I just wanted to touch briefly on the lobby revisions that are planned. Here you can see a few images of the interior. And we think this is important because it shows that we'll be updating our design with traditional materials that are used in a very kind of clean and modern way. It's also interesting to note that these materials are all much lighter in color than the existing. The existing lobby, I don't have photos of it, but it's very dark. And what that does is it actually kind of turns the entrances into mirrors at night. So you really don't get much of a sense of the inside of the building. The other thing that's on this image is the new Nobu restaurant that will remain as is and stay in operation again while we're doing this effort. The next slide here, you can see the Nobu restaurant with the doors open and the lights on inside, and you can actually see how it draws the eye in and really kind of connects to the street in a very powerful way. And so that's one of the things that we'll be looking to hopefully accomplish with the lobby as well. If I move to the next image here, we've got the corner of Hamilton and Emerson. We're going to be replacing some of the planting down at the bottom here. Not actually, the planting basically remains as is, but we'll be replacing the planters. There's a little planter on the second floor that's not very visible from the street, but connects more directly to the second floor. So if I move on to what we're proposing for the ground floor, this textured stone wall kind of creates a base to the building below the belt course. We're proposing the texture to kind of give it some interest as you're walking by on the pedestrian level. And then if I flip to the next page here, the proposal is to light this at a very slight angle from above, which calls attention in the evening and at night to the texture and sort of washes the surface with light that plays across the surface. The other thing that this does is provide a sort of soft backlight for the pedestrians that are walking by on the street, kind of turning them into the activity as opposed to perhaps the building so much. Next image here just shows our proposal for the canopy, much thinner and lighter than the existing. And again, you can see here the lighter colored interiors drawing your focus into the building a bit more. People silhouetted against the wall in the background. This slide just focuses briefly on the upgrades to the balconies between these screens between the rooms. They're just being basically changed out to give them a bit more of a sort of Japanese aesthetic. The intent is to color them similar to the way that they're colored now, so that they work with the sort of dark colored window frames and railings, but also tie into the new bronze elements at the canopy and at the new entry doors. A quick overview of the materials here. These are our existing materials that we're sort of playing off of. We have this kind of faux wood wrapping up and around the building. Again, that is all proposed to remain. And then this sort of black paint colors here. The rest of the materials are not really anything that we're playing off of, so we didn't mention them here. And then the new materials. In rebuilding the belt course, in order to put lighting in it, we're suggesting to finish it in an actual wood material that would play with the surrounding faux wood facing on the sides and up around the top, the dark colored metals and oil rubbed bronze. And then we have our textured stone, and as Samuel mentioned, this lighter stone flooring that sort of spills out here out of the entry onto Hamilton. So as you can see, it's our proposal is fairly simple. We're not doing a whole lot. And we thank you for your time and look forward to working with you to make this a successful project. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Are there any, I wish to open up to the public, any public comments, but I don't have any speaker cards. Are there any questions from the board? Peter?
Sure. Some technical questions for the architect, I guess. Help me read your plans. The canopy that projects over the pedestrian entrance off of Emerson, is that being changed in scope or shape? Does it project further out along Emerson?
In overall scope, it does not project out any further. It is thinner than the existing canopy. The existing canopy, if I can go back a few here, is this kind of the belt course wraps around and then actually wraps up and around the canopy, which...
So that's exactly my question, where it steps out
Yes.
at the entrance. Does it extend the scope of the amount that steps out?
No,
When
the actual footprint is the same. It's just the profile that's...
Okay, thank you.
been
I want to
brought
be
down.
clear about that. Secondly, how is the teak detailed? You're putting genuine teak boards, I see, on that
Yes.
belt course, as you call it. Which direction is the grain running, and a little bit more detail, how big are the boards, or how is it done?
Currently, we're proposing to run the boards in the same direction that we're showing here. So there'll be vertical boards. There are limitations to the size of teak in an outdoor application especially. So they'll be not overly large, perhaps up to 8 inches or so, but likely not much larger than that. The tone will be similar to the tone of especially the darker color that you see here.
Is there a detail of that parapet in this package? Just how is the end grain exposed on the bottom? How do you weather protect it on the top? Things like that. I don't mean to be overly detailed, but it's so critical that this work, and teak is really tough to work with in an exterior.
So let's see, the best place to see it in this package is probably on this detail here. I don't really have a page number, but it's textured diffuse luminosity at the top of the page. And so it will have a parapet cap that'll kind of wrap over the top in a very minimal way. And then the end grain will be exposed on the bottom, kind of forming a drip edge there at the bottom.
Okay.
To be honest, it's not entirely vetted through, but that's the intent.
Okay, and then the last question has to do with the Nobu restaurant. Is what I would call an open restaurant. It's most of the time those doors are wide open to the street. Is there any change proposed to the way that functions?
No, the only thing we're proposing currently in that area is changing out the planters, and that's more just to get a little bit of a more refined material that works with the rest of our palette at the planters themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I have a question for you.
Sure.
On the teak awning,
Yes.
have you reviewed that with the building and fire departments? Because that's an issue oftentimes, because you have a combustible material in the egress path.
Well, this is all exterior.
No, but that's what I'm actually saying. That is a gray area in the code that pops up. I've been burned by that, so to speak, on projects at Stanford.
Yes.
I mean, usually sometimes they'll allow it if it's heavy timber, but not if it's little, sticks.
Well, our intent would be to utilize it similar to the way that an interior finish would be done. So it would be backed by a non-combustible material and held off in a limited fashion so that while it's combustible, it provides enough protection. And to answer your question, I specifically have not talked with the building official about it, but thank you for the suggestion.
Because my recollection is that the faux wood that's on the building had an issue with the building department, and that was not the first choice of materials.
Okay.
That was the one that met the fire class ratings.
Sure.
So I do want to encourage you to do that.
Yes, we will.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Q?
Yeah, thank you for bringing this to the board. I think it looks really nice. I think there's kind of a bougie-ness to it where you're kind of making things a little bit more refined through minimalism and simplifying the materials and also brightening up the spaces, which I think will make a big difference. I had some questions that have already been answered through your presentation, but looking at the materials board, there was a smoother limestone that I think is supposed to go on the entry ramps. Could you just clarify which entry ramps you mean?
So that's right here. It's
Both on the Emerson and Hamilton side?
well, it comes out to the door at the Emerson side.
Okay.
But the entry ramp that we're really, I think, addressing is this one here, because it actually slips out through the door and then down to the sidewalk. So it's almost like a carpet
Extension
that's
of the
extended
building,
out
sure.
to bring people in.
So my only concern with that would be, I love the material, but, of course, we don't get too much rain here, but can it be a slippery hazard as something to consider?
Yes.
Something I didn't notice until this morning was actually the change to the Emerson awning. I never really liked the way that the belt popped out like that, and I think the way that you're addressing it is much cleaner. Originally, I was thinking, does it make sense to make the awning the same width as the metal panels coming down? But I see that you're changing some things there. You're adding a new metal panel to where some of that tree metal is currently. So I think it works pretty well the way you have it, and I wouldn't make a change to that awning from the way that you have it proposed. The biggest concern that I have is the pedestrian overlay requirements and some of the other things in our code that ask for the building to be more open and transparent. And I think it's tough because, at least from the floor plans that we received, I don't know what's exactly there currently, but I don't think it's possible, or maybe is it possible to add a couple more windows and make it a little bit more visible to the interior? I think the notion of Nobu having moved into the space and now it becoming Nobu Hotel, while it's great, to some it feels like a very expensive place where I can't go, and I just don't want the Jerusalem stone and this heaviness to make it feel even more so like a place where it's only for people that can afford to go there. But at the same time, I think I really like the texture of the stone, and while it, in a sense, may feel heavy because it is a stone, I think it also feels very light in the colors that you're using and the ways that you're lighting that surface so that you see the articulation. But again, I would ask to see if there can be a little bit more porosity between the lobby and the exterior. And overall, I think it looks great, and I'm sure it'll be well maintained. But I'm looking forward to hearing from the rest of the board and perhaps your responses to some of our comments. Thank you.
And Wynn?
Thank you. I had two areas where I needed more information. One was, you were here, could you tell us a bit about the last round of discussions and how we got the project we have now?
So you're referencing the previous ARB approval.
I am.
So if you guys remember, if you recall the original building, the Casa Olga building, it had the garage entrance on Emerson Street, and so it was a huge change to get, a big change there to improve to put the lobby there and to close the garage. And the board still had concerns about the corner. It used to be brick, and it's this fire stair and elevator, so we can't really add windows there. But it was really a dark and dead corner, especially at night. In the daytime, you didn't really notice it so much, but at nighttime, it really seemed to kill the connectivity between the different sections of the Emerson Street, restaurant row. The illuminated perforated panels was the designer's idea, and that came after the preliminary review, and the board really liked it. And if you've seen the inside of the building, it ties into the interior design, or at least the previous interior design of the of some of the rooms. So does that help?
It does.
And the metal, the faux wood, and the depth of the cornice and stuff, that was under debate. That was debated. And some changes were made at the subcommittee level, and not everybody was happy with the results of the change, with those changes.
Thank you. And then for staff and maybe the applicant, could you explain more about the proposal for 620 Emerson? I understand there's a proposal for a party space or social space on the second story that ties into the hotel. My real question is, how does this integrate into the hotel, and what's proposed? I mean, if this was a CEQA project, we'd be saying, don't project split. Here we've got a somewhat different issue, which is we know that step 2 is going to be more of this frontage along Emerson, and we'll have a better idea of what we need in the hotel section if we know a bit about what might be going next door.
Sure. The proposal for the 620 Emerson building, which is more commonly known as the flower shop.
Stanford Florist.
Yeah, it's been a flower shop for several years. Was purchased and is currently proposed to be demolished essentially and rebuilt roughly at pretty much the same footprint and size, but it would have...
Well, they already maxed out their footprint, right?
Right, they're pretty much maxed out. But the other thing is that they're mainly seeking to expand the Nobu restaurant into that space, because currently it's limited to the side of Hamilton Avenue that you could see from the street. That's pretty much the entire restaurant.
And would there be internal connections between the two buildings?
Yes, there's proposed internal connections.
So it's going to be an integrated project?
Right.
Sort of like the Masons, but more so. That's a reference to another project down the street. Thank you. Okay, well, I often go by this building. It's on my way to the grocery store. And it's also on my way to dinner or to visit friends. So I went and looked at it again. I must say, everything looks beautiful in early morning light, but this looked particularly nice. And I think the two frontages are very different in terms of their success, in terms of the pedestrian overlay, and in terms of finding number 4 that we have to make about good pedestrian and bicycle traffic in the area. I'm going to give up on the bicycle issue here. On Hamilton, there are a lot of things going for it. The restaurant makes an interesting thing to look at, to see, to hear. The fact that you have essentially elbow height landscaping, that's not going to change, is very nice for pedestrians. I think that's all good. It isn't particularly welcoming because it's quite a specialized use, but it's an attractive thing to walk by. I don't think it discourages pedestrians. There is no seating anywhere along that frontage. There possibly could be a bench over by the service section of the building. It is all a great improvement over the garages that used to be there. There did used to, in fact, be a storefront there. There was a beauty shop. But when we come around to Hamilton, that sidewalk doesn't work. And I was trying to figure out why. And I had this memory of being pushed into the dirt there, and I thought, how can that be? There's no dirt, but there is. And back in the era when double-wide strollers were more common, I frequently found myself being urged into the dirt. And as it is, that is the side where there are valet parkers, where people check in. Those people are, the staff is unfailingly polite, but that takes up space on a very busy sidewalk. And there's nowhere to get out. And there is a lot of dirt, city-owned dirt on that sidewalk, with one lone podocarpus that really isn't very successful in that spot. I mean, it interferes with the base of the mosaic, and for me is not a very successful street tree. So I think for this frontage to work, we need to readdress that sidewalk. And I mean, I'd be in favor of digging up the tree and planting a new one or replanting it, whatever you need to do to change the grade so that we can get either with metal ratings, you know, the usual street furniture approach, so that we get a full usable work with the sidewalk there, because as it stands now, it doesn't work. And the idea of having this extremely elegant and exclusive hotel fronting on that is really inappropriate. And I think it would add to the sense of peons in the dirt. It just isn't a good transition between the sidewalk and the people in the dirt is what I mean. So I would like to see that figured out. It's a matter of using the building space and the city space to have a functional sidewalk. I prefer, in many ways, the design and materials that are being proposed. There is an existing sort of window vitrine to the left of the entrance on Emerson. I don't think it works at all. It's dark, you can't see anything. It's not inviting and it's not interesting, at least in the daytime. So I think that needs to be rethought. I also concerned that this is not meeting our pedestrian overlay standards. No matter how beautiful the stone, it's a long stretch of uninterrupted wall. I would settle for a bench. And there are a few places where the facade goes in and out. I would even probably settle for a bench next door. But I think as it stands, it doesn't meet our standards.
Thank you, Wynn. And Robert?
Thank you. I pretty much have to agree with what my fellow board members have said, that I've never been a real fan of the mosaic, or if you want to call it a mosaic. I mean, it works well at night, but in the daytime, unless you're really careful, you don't even really understand what it is. So I'm not too worried about that aspect of it.
Could you clarify, I think you mean the perforated metal, because there is a mosaic as well, the tree.
Well, okay, I'm sorry.
Just make sure it's.
I'm talking about the ground floor, not the tree. That's what I'm talking about, the perforated metal, if you want to call it. So I mean, I like the treatment with the brick, but I also agree that it doesn't fit the criteria of the, you know, interest on the sidewalk type situation, although it's not really making it any worse than it is now. Not that that's a good thing, but I think it lightens it up. It's one of the interesting things that, and it's this picture that you have on the screen right now also, I have a bit of a problem. I know it's probably, you know, my wife would be the type to say only you would notice things like that, you've got a cool white or off-white color above the awning and a warm white below the awning. And to me, those two just really clash. And I know that's probably you know, a minor point, but to me, those two don't work together. I think if you're you know, they ought to be at least, the materials don't need to be the same, but at least the color ought to be the same palette. I agree with Wynn, probably, you know, something like some seating or whatever would help greatly. I don't think you need to put windows everywhere to make it more interesting for, while someone's walking by. I also agree, I think the sidewalk needs to be part of that whole project on Emerson, as far as, I mean, in the sense of cleaning that area up. I like the canopy. It's a definite improvement. I also agree that I've had the same thing, not to re-mention the pun of being burned, but the wood on the exterior, the fire marshal will probably say something about it. So I mean, there are, you know, enough faux products out there. I think you could probably get a pretty close copy of what your intent is. All in all, I think it's definitely an improvement.
Great, thank you, Robert. And Peter.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I find everybody's comments pertinent and important and interesting. To me, it sort of summarizes up. The issue is we have a pedestrian overlay requiring especially corners to be open and visible, and this is clearly not, and it never has been. And I think, as Alex pointed out, it's not really capable of having windows put in there. What I see is, in the past, the architecture board also struggled with this, and they came up with this perforated metal screening. And I agree, during the day it just looks muted, but I find at night it to be extremely vibrant. And I find combining that vibrant, extremely brightly lit facade with the incredibly busy activity going on in the restaurant next to it easily meets the requirements for a pedestrian-friendly activity on the street in the corner. It's one of the most pedestrian-friendly corners in town at night. It's just always buzzing. And I was really trying to sort of look at, why is that the case? Why is it so friendly and buzzing and busy? And I think there's two things. One is the active restaurant. Even more so with Nobu, and everybody wants to see who's eating there tonight. And you drive right by and you can see in. And the second thing is this tree lighting quasi-sculpture is really interesting at night, or different, or catches your attention. And that's what makes it work, I think. I'm saying that because, to me, when I look at this project, clearly the materials are of high quality, the design is high quality, the use is appropriate, and everything else is fine. So what I'm trying to do is find ways that we can, what changes are reasonable that still meet the past architecture board efforts and the guidelines of the town. And so I've come up with what I think are perhaps 4 ideas of how to meet that goal. So one of them would be to take the new stone and perhaps put 2 kinds of lighting on it. If you had a recessed in the ground, very bright uplights with the texture of the stone at night, that would really make it bounce and be powerful in the corner. I think the stone, just down the street is another stone building, Roxy Rapp's building, with bright uplighting on the stone, and it has that same effect. It really struck me walking by there yesterday, I think it was yesterday night, how strong that is. Something like that is just a slight design enhancement to the stone to make it punch and be strong. Combined with the softer downlight the architect was talking about, might be enough to replicate some of the effort of the tree design that's there now. Secondly, I think the sidewalk could certainly be improved, and some seating and public areas, and do something to offset Q's comments that this is a very expensive and elite restaurant and hotel now. And it is important that everybody in town feel comfortable on that corner. And I understand what he's talking about when I joke that we all want to see who's dining there now. I don't want to feel like I have to cross the street because I'm of the Creamery crowd, not the Nobu crowd. And so if you put on that corner nicer landscaping, maybe a different paving on the sidewalk, some benches or seats or something to just make it feel more friendly to the whole town as a public gesture. I think it would also just make it a nicer entrance to your hotel, but they could be very minimalist styled benches or bike racks or something, but some improvements that way would help a lot. Thirdly, I just want to reiterate that it's really important that the restaurant remain functioning the way it is now, where it really opens to the street. It's really what allows the rest of that to be closed. And if that restaurant were for some reason to decide they wanted to close it off and quiet fine dining, that would really change the whole block for the worse. And that would affect the thinking we have going on, at least for me, around the corner. So I know that's functioning right now the way I'm proposing, but I'm just putting it for the record that that's an important function. And lastly, around the corner at 620 Emerson, I think Wynn points out some good things about, it would be nice to see what that facade is going to look like as well. Certainly these are combined projects with the same organization doing it. Seems to me that we should see that whole length of the facade to be confident with it. That's my comments. I think we could make those changes to it. Probably have to have the project come back, though, to see that. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Peter. I have one question for the architect. What are you planning to do with the existing exit door from the staircase?
The intent with the exit door is to do essentially similarly what's been done now, which is to cover the exit door in a way that from the outside, you really don't see anything. It's only an exit, and it goes away as much as possible. And so the intent right at this point is to face it with a honeycomb-backed stone so that it's still light enough to operate as it needs to, obvious, but goes away essentially in the facade as much as we can make it happen.
Yeah, this is tricky to do.
Yes.
Right? Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think that I can support the project. My take on it is that going back to the original building design, it was dark. I mean, it was blank, but it was also dark. And it seems like, I think, with the lighter color and lighting, and if there are sidewalk improvements, that I think it could work. I like the existing perforated metal at night. I think that looks great, but I don't think that this is. I don't think that the proposed design is. I think that, what do I want to say? I think it could meet our findings. So. Yeah, so I think that I'm on board with that. I do worry about the wood that's being proposed, and so I do want that to be reviewed by the building department and fire department. And then I think my last comment is on the uplighting. I think we do have some. I think we have some conditions in our performance requirements of the code about discouraging uplighting. I don't know if they're necessarily triggered in this particular situation because I don't think there's any residential use next door, but I would just have to look at the exact language of that code.
And it's hitting a canopy above it, so it's not really...
Right, and if it's angled too, I think that could help. So anyway, so I'm in support of the project. If I read the staff correctly, I think you're recommending continuing this project. It seems like the board is on the same page. If we recommended coming back to subcommittee, is staff be okay with that? Or do you think it's better for this to come back? I think
we would defer that to the board.
Yeah.
We feel that it would come back to subcommittee.
Okay, that's fine.
Especially if we're going to talk about showing at least a pretty good idea of what the adjacent building's going to look like, so we get a better...
Okay. Okay. So I'm done. Any motions?
Do you have a date in mind for us to continue this?
Sounds like there's some additional work that needs to be done.
We're hoping to see. So move that the matter be continued to a later date, to be determined by staff.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we will see you in the future at a date uncertain. Thank you. Okay, we have one last item, which is the meeting minutes for September 7th, 2017. Are there any comments from the board? I have one. So there was a subcommittee item there for Avenidas, and the subcommittee approved those items. It was just paint color, trellis detail, lighting fixture review. So if that could just be added into the minutes.
And I have a couple of transcript typos I'll give to staff.
I think this was the meeting where Board Member Balte had to possibly recuse himself in the middle of the garage discussions, which turned out to be not the case, but I don't know if that affects the voting on the minutes. I guess it doesn't, right? Yeah.
You can vote on the minutes to the extent that you were able to participate, to the parts that you were here for, you can certainly vote affirmatively for that.
Yeah,
or
just
abstain
it
if you prefer.
triggers my memory that at staff's request, wrote up a bunch of comments that I was prepared to make. And has that become part of the minutes, or is that part of the record?
You had the opportunity to read them because you didn't have to leave yet, the way I remember it.
Well, so the answer to your question is it's part of the administrative record and that we have it in our records and we've communicated to the applicant. It is not a part of your minutes because it did not take place here at this meeting.
But it's not something that's communicated to my fellow board members necessarily.
It's true, and it will be communicated when the item returns. We can include that information.
Okay, I'll leave it up to however you think is the proper way to do that.
Yeah, let me give some thought. Maybe we can get it in advance.
That would be good for the applicant to have it, surely,
The applicant does have the.
which is you.
But Board Member Liu pointed out to me that it is important. I had emailed them to him out of deference as the chair, and he said I shouldn't be doing that because it essentially constitutes a Brown Act violation meeting, or potentially does. So I'm referring to staff for some guidance on that. But I felt strongly about those comments and wanted to be sure that the board got to hear them one way or another.
Sure, yeah.
So I'll leave that to staff.
The best way to do
Thank
that.
And then for the Brown Act, it's that you can send me something, but then I can't.
Forward it to somebody.
I can't talk to somebody else about the project. And that causes some problems. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Or do we have a
I'm
second?
going to abstain from that.
Yeah, I don't even know, do we even have a motion to approve? Can somebody make a motion?
I think there was an implied motion to approve the minutes,
Okay.
but
All in
there's no
favor?
second.
Yes.
Who seconded the
I'll
motion? I heard.
I'll second it.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None.
I abstain.
Okay. We are adjourned. Thank you.